Hi everyone. This is going to be a video in which I go over some of the answers to the MLA worksheets that I had you do during week 8. It's probably not going to be the most exciting video, but when I was grading these assignments, I noticed that a lot of people struggled with them in some way or another. MLA could be a hard thing to really get a good grasp on. So I wanted to not only show you the answers, but kind of talk to you about um, like why these are the answers, how I came up with the things that I did, and just some of the like little things that are maybe hard to pick up on if you're just trying to kind of like learn MLA from the textbook. Anyways, this is the worksheet on practice citing sources. Here I asked you to cite a scholarly journal from a database, and your citation should look like this. For instance, one thing that a lot of people didn't do is they did not double space their citation. Also, they did not do a hanging indent. Keep in mind that your citation should always look like this in MLA. The way that you do this hanging indent is not that hard, really. Um, so I'm going to kind of show you how to do that by undoing mine. Okay, so yeah, I would have had something like this. There we go. Okay. So to do the hanging indent, first what you can try is pressing tab, and you'll notice that that didn't work, that tabbed it all over. So what you'll usually need to do is click here and press enter one, maybe two times. And I'm going to do the same thing there. So that's going to give me the double spacing. And then if I click up here and press tab, which is what I just did, it will just move that line over. So by pressing enter and tab, you should be able to create the hanging indent, and you shouldn't need to mess around with the arrows up here. If you start messing around with the arrows at the top of the document, that's a really good way to mess up some of the formatting of other things in the document. So I would try to make those adjustments just in the paragraph itself. Anyway, so your citation should look like this. We have the first author's last name, Martin Rios, and then his first name, Carlos. And now this particular source had more than 3 authors. In MLA, if you have 3 or more authors, you just put the first author's name and then you put et al., which stands for and others. So you should not have every single author's name listed here, just the first author and then et al. The title of the article needs to go in quotation marks, and the title of the journal should be italicized. A good way to remember that is that the title of a source that is found inside of another source is usually going to be put in quotation marks. So, for instance, articles are usually found within journals or on a larger website. So, because that's a smaller source inside of a bigger source, the smaller source goes in quotation marks, the larger source is italicized. This is volume 79. Notice that I did not capitalize the V in volume. I also did not spell out volume. It should look exactly like this. Now I wasn't able to find an issue number, so anytime you can't find the information, it's okay to just not put it. You don't need to put anything in its place. You just skip that part. It was published September 2018. The page numbers are these. And also notice that I do PP period. So I don't do like PG period or P period. If it's more than one page, the abbreviation you use is PP. If it was just one page, you would have a single P. And then notice we have a period here at the end of that kind of strain of things. So starting here with the title of the journal, the volume, the publication date, and the pages, all of that is just being separated by these commas. And then we put a period at the end. Next, we have the title of the database. And the title of the database, because it is a larger source, that is going to be italicized. And then we do a comma and then the DOI. If a source has a DOI, you should provide it. DOI are basically the most reliable ways of finding a source again. If there isn't a DOI, then you want to try to find what is called a permalink, which is a permanent link to that source. If it doesn't say permalink, then it's probably not a permalink. The last thing that you should do, if you can't find a DOI, you can't find a permalink, then just provide the URL. But the URLs or like regular links, like this YouTube one down here, are not super reliable. So anyways, we have the database, we have the DOI, and then the accessed date. Now, technically, you don't need the access date in MLA. It is optional, but it's typically better to put it there just to be safe. This just lets your reader know the last time that you looked at that source. Next, we have a YouTube video, and I actually learned something as I was creating this citation. Normally, I would have put the title of the video in quotation marks because it is a smaller source. Your textbook, however, said that the title of the video should be italicized. So that's something I may need to look into myself later. But for now, if you're going to be citing a YouTube video or some other online video, just follow what your textbook says. But we have the author's last name and their first name. We have the title of the video and a period. Then we have the title of the site, YouTube. This was the date that it was posted. Notice that the dates I've been using day, month, year. That's what you do in MLA. So normally when we write out dates, we would put month, day, year. So like December 7th, 2017. But in MLA, we flip the day and the month. I then provided the link to the video as well as the access date. Moving along, we have the book. Citing books are actually maybe surprisingly one of the easiest things to cite. Again, we have the author, Dan Jones, and we make sure to invert his name, last name, first name. We have the title of his book, Summer of Blood, and the subtitle as well. All of that goes in italics. It is italicized because it's a longer source. Period, and then we have the publisher, a comma, followed by the year that it was published. And then our last one, this is just an online article, so not found through a database. Again, we have author's last name, author's first name, and then actually this is a little bit tricky. Um, there was something on this article that led me to believe that this Anthony Zurcher didn't write the whole article. He just wrote a portion of it. In fact, on the article, it says analysis by Anthony Zurcher. So in MLA, if you ever need to clarify something about the author, you can do that here. So like if it was a TV show and I wanted to like if it was an actor who I was citing, I do performance by, or if I was citing the director, I do directed by. So in this instance, the analysis was written by him, so I put analysis by. The title of the article is this because that is a shorter source located on a larger source. It goes in quotation marks. We have the title of the website, which is just news, and because that's a larger source, it needs to be italicized. We have a comma. We have the publisher. This is published by BBC, and then we have the date that it was published, followed by the URL, and then finally the accessed date. So you're probably noticing that each of these citations follows a pretty similar format. That is true for most sources. Most things you cite in MLA will be very similar to each other. So it's kind of just a matter of getting used to that formula and knowing how to do it. Now, I used to have MLA memorized, but since I've started also helping people write in APA format, I no longer have them memorized. There's kind of just too much information up there for me to keep it all separate. Um, so it's perfectly fine to look things up. That's how I did these citations this morning. I just, I went to the pages in the textbook, I looked up how to cite each source, and I figured it out. And that's what I recommend you doing. I think I've mentioned before that citation generators aren't always super reliable. Um, so it's typically better to just do the citation yourself. Next, we have this using quotes worksheet, and again, I'll walk you through the answers here. These should have all been pretty straightforward. The things I want to point out, notice here that I have the comma inside of the quotation marks. So in other words, so this is inside the quotation marks, and then this is outside the quotation marks. Punctuation typically goes inside of quotation marks. And then we have the rest of it, and there actually needs to be a period at the end here. Periods always go after the in-text citation, or I should say usually go after the in-text citation, because the in-text citation is technically still a part of the sentence. So you wouldn't put the period here, even though this looks like the end of the sentence, because technically the citation, is still part of the sentence, and as we know, you put periods at the end of sentences. Next, the tricky thing here is we have a quote within a quote. So here, Scarface, this author was quoting someone else. And when you do that, you have to put single quotation marks around the word. So notice here I have these like apostrophes on either side of the word. We call those single quotation marks, and that shows my reader that this is a quote occurring within a larger quote. You're still going to have the double or the normal quotation marks on surrounding the rest of the quote, but any smaller things occurring within the quote need to go in single quotation marks. Here, notice the period is inside the quotation marks because, again, punctuation typically goes inside of quotation marks. The exception here is notice that I put the period after the in-text citation because, again, periods ultimately go at the end of sentences. So the period doesn't go here, it would go here after the parenthetical citation. I apologize if I'm speaking maybe a little bit faster than you would like me to. There's just a lot to go over here, and I don't want this video to be super long. So just remember that you can always, re-listen to sections again if you need to, or of course, send me an email if you need me to clarify anything. Next, we have how to punctuate long quotation marks. So here, in MLA format, if you have a quote that is longer than 4 lines of text, it needs to be put in what we call block format. Um, and what that looks like is you have a colon here, and then you want to skip a line. So we have this space here, and then notice that I started my quote. I have indented it from the rest of the paragraph. That's mainly what block format is. And notice that I didn't like indent this first line like I normally would with a new paragraph. And that's why it's called a block, because it's kind of just a block of text where all the lines are, each line of text is lined up with each other. And notice that I don't have any quotation marks here. When you are putting a quote in block format, you do not use quotation marks. And then here, this is the one time where the period actually doesn't go after the in-text citation. When you're putting something in block format, the period goes after the words and not after the parenthetical citation. I don't know why that is. I've been an English teacher for a long time, and I've never heard an explanation for why that is. It just is what you do. So I know that's probably confusing. Luckily, though, so my advice is just avoid block quotes. Usually, professors and English teachers and stuff, typically we frown on a paper that has block quotes. We would rather hear your own thoughts, your own ideas, rather than just reading, big chunks of someone else's writing. So generally, you want to avoid block quotes, anyways. Moving on here, this is practice using ellipses. Um, when you are just removing like a few words from a sentence, you want to use 3 dots. But if you're removing a whole sentence, you're going to use 4. So we have a period here to show that this is the end of the sentence. And then we have the ellipses here to indicate that at least one whole sentence has been removed from this section. And now the reason why you would do that is, again, if you want to avoid block quotes, usually if you have a big chunk of text that you're trying to quote, usually not all of that text is going to be important. Usually there's only a small part of the quote that is actually necessary. So you can just cut out parts that are too wordy or too confusing, or too long. So those are some of the reasons why you would want to use an ellipses to remove parts of a quote. What you don't want to do is remove parts of a quote so that it means something different. You're not allowed to edit quotes to make them mean what you want them to mean. We just change things within quotes to make them easier to read, basically. And then finally, here we have changing words in a quote. Anytime you change a word or multiple words in a quote, you are going to put it in brackets, which are what these things are called right here. And again, so in this exercise, I had you swap out the words for things with roughly similar meanings. That's basically how you want to use brackets. Again, you're not allowed to change quotes to make them just say whatever you want. The goal is to change the wording if it helps it like flow better, or helps it make more sense, or you need to like clarify something. So that's kind of what this exercise was about. Was I didn't want you to fully change the meaning of the quote, which is why I had you use similar words. I just wanted to give you some practice with altering quotes correctly. So I went with opportunities, approximately, primary, and aggressive. You might have had something different. There's not really like one right answer to these. And I didn't do this part of the assignment because I got the sense that people didn't struggle with this quite as much as they struggled with other parts of the assignment. All right, we have one last thing here. All right, so this is the MLA documentation practice. For this first section, you are given a quote, and you're given what source it came from in the page number. So what you were supposed to do is to put these things, put them into a sentence that is correct using MLA format. So here I have Donaldson in his work Bantering on Watergate remarks, he spoke to us in German and then left us behind. So important things that I'm doing here, I have a signal phrase that includes the author's name. And that's very important to MLA. You almost always want to do that. Um, and notice that my quote is connected to my own words. You do not want quotes to stand on their own. So this is what I mean when a quote is floating on its own or standing on its own. It's not a part of the same sentence as my own words. So you're usually going to use a comma or a colon to connect your quotes to the rest of the sentence. Quotes should not be floating on their own. And then after my quote, I have my in-text citation here at the end. Now, yours may not look exactly like mine do, but that's the general format that you should have followed. Another example here, we have he claimed, so this is our signal phrase. This one isn't as helpful because I don't include the author's name here, but because I don't include the author's name in the signal phrase, I made sure to put it here in the in-text citation. So he claimed, comma, I never thought of myself as proud, Jennings, page 107, period to end the sentence. And let's go over one more example. Smith, in remarking on his career choice, says, politics is such an interesting, that should say field. Typed that incorrectly. There we go. So again, important things that I'm doing here. I have a signal phrase that tells me where the information is coming from. My signal phrase mentions the author's name. I put the quote within quotation marks. I have a comma here before the quote, and I have my page number at the end of the sentence. So that's what I was looking for these things. Honestly, these MLA worksheets, I may not use, these work a lot better for in-person classes when we can It's easier for me to explain them in person, and we can kind of pause and go over examples. That's harder to do in an online class. So when I teach this class again online, I may not use these worksheets again. Next, we have a short quiz on plagiarism. So here, when you use the work of another writer, you must provide documentation in all of the following cases, except when you write your thoughts or reflections after reading the author's text. So because it's your thoughts, you don't need to provide documentation. But if you are, quoting someone word for word, you still need to provide documentation or a citation, in other words. If you use the exact words of the writer, but you change the wording, so in other words, you like paraphrase it, you still need to provide a citation. And even when you use the writer's organizational plan or examples, you should use a citation. Next, underline the statements that do constitute plagiarism. So which of these things count as plagiarism? C and E. So you are allowed to meet with another English teacher to do like a conference or a consultation. You are allowed to use the exact words of another writer as long as you put them in quotation marks and use a parenthetical citation. And you are allowed classmates to help you with peer review. What you're not allowed to do, you can't submit a paper that you turned in for another class, even if you took the class in the past. So if you're like retaking Comp 1 or whatever, you should be creating new papers, even though you've already taken the class, because that counts as self-plagiarism. And you should also not allow a friend or anyone to revise your paper. You are supposed to edit and revise things yourself. Let's see. Next, so these are kind of testing your knowledge on paraphrasing, quoting, and summarizing. This one is obviously a quote because we have something in quotation marks here. Rousseau suggests that although they come into the world uninhibited, human beings find themselves universally oppressed. Because there's a page number, and because there's nothing here in quotes, that tells us that this is a paraphrase. So it's not a quotation, and they're not summarizing. They're putting something that Rousseau said into their own words. And then finally, in his essay, The Origin of Civil Society, Rousseau questions his observations of humanity, which indicates that a person's free nature and his or her actual social status are in conflict. So notice here that nothing is being quoted. There's also no page numbers being provided. And the fact that the writer here used this phrase in his essay suggests to us that this is a summary. So that's the correct answer for this one. Lastly, I hope you all are hanging in there with me. I'm trying to move fast, but not too fast. This was definitely a tricky exercise, especially if you just aren't very familiar with MLA. Why does the parenthetical reference in line 2 include only the page number? Because the author of the source is mentioned in the signal phrase. When you mention the author in a signal phrase, you do not need to put their last name in the parenthetical citation. Next, why is there a parenthetical reference with a page number in the middle of the sentence in line 4? So two different sources are being cited in this sentence. The citation in the middle of the sentence is for the first source. The citation at the end of the sentence is for the second source. And we do that to make it clear which page number goes with which source. Number 13, why are there brackets in the quotation in line 6? The writer has changed the wording of the quote to clarify where the information is coming from. 14, why are there ellipses in line 10? Ellipses indicate that one or more words were removed from the quote. This can be done to make quotes clearer or more concise. Who wrote the words, love was short-lived? Boom wrote those words, and I have an explanation here for how I knew that that was the answer. So number 1, there's no author mentioned in a signal phrase in that sentence. Then I notice that there's no author in the in-text citation. So noticing those two things made me go look at the following sentence, the sentence before this one, and I saw that boom is being cited. And in MLA, if no new source is being referenced, you don't need to keep putting the author's name in the in-text citation. So let's say, for instance, you're citing Smith. If you have a sentence where you're citing Smith, you would do Smith, page 45. And if you keep quoting from Smith, you don't need to keep writing Smith's name. You just keep putting the page number. And then when you change to a new source, that's when you would need to put the author's name. Let's see here. Why is the question mark in question 15 outside of the quotation marks? The writer, whoever wrote these paragraphs here, they were asking the question. The question isn't a part of the quote. If the quote was asking a question, the question mark would be inside of the quotation mark. But because it is the author's question, it goes outside of the quotation mark. Here, rewrite the last sentence of the citation to make it appropriate. So here, this is kind of like the previous activity we talked about. We have a signal phrase where we mention the author's name. The signal phrase flows in with the quote. The quote isn't floating by itself. We have the quote in quotation marks, and we have the parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence. I'm going to skip these two and go to number 20. Number 20 asks you, what is the overall concern for the second paragraph? The second paragraph relies too heavily on its sources. In most writing, people are going to be more interested in hearing your thoughts and your ideas. So you don't want to overload the reader with a bunch of quotes and paraphrases. You want to have there's no real rule that says you need to have like X number of quotes per paragraph. You just need to make sure that you are using more of your own thoughts, words, and ideas and not relying too heavily on your sources. All right, I know that was a lot of information. I'm guessing some of that was hard to follow. Just keep in mind that for a lot of these worksheets, I put page numbers in your textbook so that you can look up this information. Also, your textbook has a very good index that tells you where to find things. And if you go to the chapter on MLA, they have the sections pretty clearly labeled as well. So yeah, if I went through this a little bit too quickly, you should still be able to go back and look up some of the things that I was talking about. And hopefully with this video where I show you the correct answers, that will give you a little bit better idea of how to handle some of the things that are required in MLA.